Stan Kasten has been in professional sports for nearly 5 decades. He has built franchises. He has torn them down and rebuilt them. He has sat across negotiating tables from the most powerful agents in the business and never flinched. He has made decisions, cold, necessary, sometimes brutal decisions, about human beings that most people in this country will never have to make. He has learned, over 50 years in the most results-driven industry in American entertainment, how to watch a baseball game the way an owner watches a baseball game. Not as a fan. Not as a father. As a chairman. As the man ultimately responsible for every contract, every roster move, every calculation about what a player is worth and what a player costs and whether those two numbers can be made to meet somewhere in the middle. Stan Kasten knows how to watch a player as an asset. He knows how to separate the human being from the investment. He has had to. You cannot run a professional sports franchise for 50 years without developing that ability. Without learning to see a player's name on a contract and feel something different from what the crowd feels when that same name appears on a scoreboard. He knows how to do that. And then Shohei Ohtani stepped into the batter's box with an injured hand. And Stan Kasten forgot everything he knew. He no longer looked like a tactical card to me. That sentence, spoken by a man who has spent a lifetime treating players, necessarily, professionally, without apology, as exactly that. Spoken quietly. With something in his voice that the reporters in that room recognized immediately as the thing that press conferences almost never contain. Sincerity. Not the managed sincerity of a prepared statement. Not the careful emotion of a chairman who has consulted with his communications team about exactly how human to appear. The real thing. The unguarded thing. The thing that arrives when a man sees something that breaks through 50 years of professional distance and reaches the part of him that existed before all the contracts and all the calculations. The part that remembered what it felt like to simply love the game. The hand had been a concern for days. Not publicly. Publicly, the Dodgers organization had said what organizations say, that the situation was being monitored, that Ohtani was day-to-day, that the medical staff was involved and the right decisions would be made at the right time. The language of managed uncertainty. The language designed to give away as little as possible while appearing to give away everything. But inside the stadium, inside the clubhouse, inside the rooms where the people who actually know things speak to each other, the concern was real. The hand was not nothing. The hand was the thing that connects Shohei Ohtani to every part of what makes Shohei Ohtani possible. The pitching. The hitting. The specific, irreplaceable physical instrument through which all of it flows. When that instrument is compromised, everything downstream is compromised with it. Kasten knew this. He knew it the way a chairman knows things, through reports, through conversations with the medical staff, through the particular awareness that comes from owning something extraordinarily valuable and understanding exactly how fragile extraordinary value can be. He was watching from his seat when Ohtani's name appeared in the lineup. He had been told Ohtani would play. He had not been fully prepared for what playing would look like. The at-bat came in a moment that the game had made important, the kind of moment that may games sometimes produce when the standings are close and both teams understand that every game between now and October is quietly accumulating into something larger. The count worked. The pitcher worked. And Ohtani stood in that batter's box with his injured hand gripping a bat and his body arranged in the specific, practiced geometry of a man who has taken millions of swings and knows exactly what a swing is supposed to feel like. What it felt like that night was different. Anyone watching closely enough could see it, a slight compensation, a barely perceptible adjustment in the load, the way an athlete unconsciously protects something without fully acknowledging to himself that he is protecting it. He swung anyway. And somewhere in the seats where chairmen sit, Stan Kasten stopped being a chairman. He hadn't intended to speak publicly about it. That was the thing that made the moment so disarming when it arrived. Kasten is not a man who makes unplanned statements. At his level, in his position, every word that leaves your mouth in front of a microphone is a word that has been considered, not necessarily scripted, but considered. Waited. Checked against the 17 different ways it might be interpreted and the 3 or 4 ways it might cause problems. He sat down in front of the reporters with no particular agenda beyond the standard post-game availability that ownership occasionally provides. A few words about the team's direction. A few words about the season. The kind of appearance that generates a small handful of quotes and disappears from the news cycle by morning. And then someone asked him about Ohtani's hand. Specifically, they asked him what it was like to watch Ohtani play through it. What it felt like from his seat. Kasten looked at the reporter for a moment. The look of a man running a quick internal calculation and arriving at an answer he hadn't fully expected. Then he answered honestly. I've been doing this a long time. I know how to watch a player. I know what I'm supposed to be thinking about when I'm in that seat, the contract, the roster implications, what it means for the rotation. That's always been my job. He paused. His hands were flat on the table. His voice was even but not distant. When Shohei stepped in there tonight, with that hand, knowing what he was dealing with, something happened that doesn't happen to me very often anymore. Another pause. Shorter this time. He no longer looked like a tactical card to me. He looked like someone I cared about. The way you care about a grandson. The way you care about someone whose well-being matters to you in a way that has nothing to do with the standings. The room was quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when someone in authority says something that authority figures are not supposed to say. And I'll be honest with you, that scared me a little. Because when you start feeling that way, you start wanting things for a player that might not align with winning baseball games. You want him to put down the bat. You want him to rest. You want to tell him that no game in May is worth what he's risking. He looked down at the table briefly. But you can't tell Shohei Ohtani that. Because he already knows it. And he's already decided it doesn't matter. The word that traveled. Of all the things Kasten said, and he said several things worth saying, the word that left that press conference room and moved through the American sports media through the night and into the next morning was that one. Grandson. It was an unusual word. A word that belongs to kitchens and holidays and the particular tenderness of age looking at youth and seeing something of itself and something entirely new simultaneously. It was not a word that belongs in a chairman's press conference. It was not a word from the vocabulary of professional sports ownership. Which was precisely why it landed the way it landed. Because it named something that the usual vocabulary couldn't reach. The relationship between an owner and a franchise player is supposed to be professional. Respectful, certainly. Appreciative, ideally. But bounded. Contained within the limits of what the relationship actually is, employer and employee, asset and organization, investment and investor. What Kasten described was something that had crossed those limits without anyone deciding it should. Not because of a contract negotiation or a marketing campaign or a deliberate organizational effort to humanize the relationship between ownership and players. Because of an at-bat. Because of a man with an injured hand deciding that the game mattered more than the pain. Because of something in that decision, in the specific, quiet stubbornness of it, that reached across 50 years of professional distance and touched something in an old man that he had apparently kept carefully protected for a very long time. Former players who heard Kasten's words responded through the day. Not all of them warmly. Some noted, with the particular directness of men who have spent careers on the other side of exactly the kind of calculations Kasten described, that the chairman's affection for Ohtani was moving but that the structure that produced it, the structure where human beings are tactical cards until they do something extraordinary enough to become grandsons, was worth examining alongside the sentiment. It was a fair point. Kasten didn't dispute it when it reached him. Everything they're saying is true, he acknowledged, in a brief follow-up exchange with a reporter. The structure is what it is. I'm not pretending otherwise. I'm just telling you what happened to me last night when I watched him bat. Both things can be true at the same time. Dave Roberts had heard Kasten's words by the time his own availability began. He smiled when the reporter brought them up. Not the managed smile of a manager navigating a delicate moment. A genuine one. The smile of a man who recognized something he already knew being described by someone who had just discovered it. Stan said grandson, Roberts repeated, almost to himself. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah. I understand that. He leaned back slightly. There's a version of coaching where you maintain complete professional distance. Where every decision is about the team and the player is a piece of the decision. I understand that version. I've operated in that version my whole career. He looked at the reporter directly. And then there's what happens when you spend every day with Shohei Ohtani. When you watch what he carries. When you understand what it costs him, not financially, not professionally, personally. What it costs him every time he walks out there and tries to be what he believes he's supposed to be. He shook his head slightly. At a certain point the professional distance stops being possible. Not because you let it go. Because he takes it away from you. One at-bat at a time. One mound visit at a time. One quiet, stubborn, impossible decision at a time. He glanced down. Stan watched one at-bat tonight and felt what I feel every day. I'm glad he finally understands what I'm working with. He was asked about his hand. Through his interpreter, after the game, in the brief availability that follows nights like this one, nights where something happened that was larger than the box score and everyone in the room knows it but nobody quite knows how to ask about it directly. He was asked if he had considered not playing. He looked at the reporter. Calm. Unhurried. The expression of a man for whom the question, however well-intentioned, contains an assumption he doesn't fully share. The team needed me in the lineup, he said. So I was in the lineup. The reporter followed up. But the hand, wasn't there a risk? Wasn't there a version of tonight where the right decision was rest? Ohtani considered this genuinely. He wasn't dismissing the question. He was actually thinking about it. There is always risk, he said finally. The question is what the risk is for. Tonight the risk was for something that mattered. So the answer was easy. Simple. Complete. The answer of a man whose internal calculation arrives at different conclusions than the calculations happening in the seats where chairmen sit and suddenly feel things they haven't felt in 50 years. For Kasten, watching that at-bat was the moment the tactical card became a grandson. For Ohtani, stepping into that batter's box with an injured hand was simply the answer to a question that had an obvious answer. The team needed him. So he was there. Stan Kasten has built franchises and won championships and negotiated contracts that changed the financial landscape of professional sports. He has seen great players. He has watched greatness from the seat that owners occupy, the seat with the longest view, the widest angle, the most complete picture of what a franchise is and what it needs and what it costs. He has watched all of it. For nearly 50 years. Without losing the professional distance that the seat requires. And then one night in May, a man with an injured hand stepped into a batter's box. And the distance went somewhere. Quietly. Without announcement. The way things go when something true arrives and the structures we build to protect ourselves from true things simply aren't strong enough. He no longer looked like a tactical card. He looked like someone worth being afraid for. Worth wanting to protect. Worth the specific, irrational, deeply human feeling of caring about an outcome not because of what it means for the standings but because of what it means for the person.